Order. Order.
Draft town and country planning fees for applications, lead applications, requests and site visits, England Amendment and Transitional Provision Regulations 2025.
I call Minister Pennycook to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms Jardine. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I beg to move that the regulations in question do now be considered. These were laid before the House on the 13th of January 2025. Ms Jardine, these draft regulations increase planning fees for householder and other applications with a view to providing much needed additional resources for hard-pressed local planning authorities. Alongside other steps that the government is taking to support local planning authorities to build their capacity and capability, these regulations will help ensure that our planning system is faster and more efficient and equipped to facilitate our ambitious Plan for Change milestone of building 1.5 million new homes in this Parliament. Let me start by providing some important context to these regulations. Ms Jardine, planning application fees were last increased by 35% for major applications and 25% for all other applications in December 2023. And yet, when it comes to planning application services in England, we still face a national funding shortfall of £362 million. Moreover, the types of planning application with the greatest gap between the fees that can be charged and the actual costs associated with processing them constitute the majority of applications received by local planning authorities. In short, the arrangement this government inherited is simply not sustainable. By increasing the level of fees charged for making those applications with the greatest funding shortfalls, we will ensure that local planning authorities can cover a greater proportion of the costs associated with processing them. This will provide an immediate boost to local planning authority resources, and we estimate in the impact assessment these changes will generate an additional £56 million annually for local planning authorities across England. This is, I'm sure you will agree, a substantial sum that will significantly enhance the capacity, capability and therefore efficiency of planning services in every part of the country to the benefit of applicants of all kinds. I'll now turn to the detail of the regulations. The regulations increase the fees for householders who want to enlarge, extend or alter their home from £258 to £528 for a single house and from £509 to £1,043 for more than one house. Whilst I acknowledge that this is a large increase, it is necessary to meet the estimated costs to local planning authorities of determining such applications, and I hope that honourable members on both sides of the committee would accept in principle that it is right that those who seek and will directly benefit from a planning permission cover these costs rather than the taxpayer. The application fee represents a small proportion, less than 1% of typical overall development costs. And as you will also know, I'm sure, Ms Jardine, certain householder development can also be undertaken through permitted development rights without the need for a planning application and so incur no fee at all. The regulations also increase fees for a range of other application types, which are currently also set too low. They increase the planning fees for prior approval applications from a flat fee of £120 to £240 and from £258 to £516 where they include building operations, and also for a change of use of commercial buildings to residential uses from £125 per dwelling to £250 per dwelling. The regulations also increase the fees for discharge of conditions from £43 to £86 for householders and from £145 to £298 for all other applications, including discharge of biodiversity net gain plans. Finally, Ms Jardine, the regulations introduce a new three-tiered fee structure for Section 73 applications that are used to vary or remove conditions on extant planning applications. This reflects the higher costs associated with Section 73 applications on major developments. The regulations also make corrections to two fees that were erroneously set too low when the fee regulations were last amended in December 2023. Taken together, the fee increases provided for by these regulations will reduce the current funding shortfalls for the various application types they apply to and will thereby enable local planning authorities to hire more staff, invest in better technology and streamline their internal processes, all of which will contribute to faster and more efficient decision making. Ms Jardine, I want to be very clear that the government expects local planning authorities to use the income from planning fees on their planning application services so that they can build up their capability and capacity and improve their performance. This is what applicants expect in return for paying higher fees. This fee increase, Ms Jardine, is not made in isolation, but is part of our broader efforts to resource and streamline the planning system. As honourable members will be aware, in the budget the Chancellor announced a £46 million package of investment into the planning system as a one-year settlement for 2025-26. As part of that investment, we're working with delivery partners to understand how we can scale delivery and fund the recruitment and training of at least an additional 300 planners. This includes expansion of the Pathways to Planning programme, which has had significant interest from prospective graduates wanting to take up roles in local planning authorities and train while they work. The Government has also announced its intention to introduce a measure in the forthcoming Planning and Infrastructure Bill that will enable local planning authorities to set their own planning fees to meet their costs. This measure will provide local planning authorities with the flexibility to adjust fees according to local needs and circumstances, ensuring that they can sustainably manage their resources and continue to deliver a high-quality service. As a result of these measures, we will ensure that local planning authorities are not only better funded, but also better equipped to handle the significant demands placed upon them. So, in conclusion, Ms Jardine, as we progress measures for local fee setting through the forthcoming Planning Infrastructure Bill, the regulations before us will provide local planning authorities with an immediate boost in resourcing and greater financial sustainability. This will ensure that they are better equipped to boost housing supply and deliver economic growth. I hope that honourable members from across the committee will join me in supporting the draft regulations, which I commend to you.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft town and country planning, fees for applications, deemed applications, requests and site visits, England, Amendment and Transitional Provision Regulations 2025. Shadow Minister Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mrs Jardine, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I think the Minister will be reassured, can I welcome him to his place, but he'll be reassured that although I like a challenge, looking at the number of colleagues opposite, we will not be dividing the committee this morning. However, as he would expect, we do have some questions for him just to elaborate on some of the points that he made in his concise speech. And Ms Jardine, we're here because the Government has announced a hike in fees for household development applications, applications for prior approval and applications for the approval of details reserved by condition. This increase is a further blow, we would argue, to homeowners who already face the complexities and red tape of the planning system. And I understand that there are also new burdens being introduced, applications for prior approval and for the approval of details reserved by condition. To approve details that were not fully described in planning permission are now facing added layers of paperwork, all of which will add to the burden on ordinary people trying to make improvements to their homes. And let's be clear about the context here. When increases in fees were necessary in the past, the last government always took care to ensure that they were fair and kept as low as possible. That is why in December 2023, as the Minister outlined, the last government increased planning application fees by 35% for major developments and 25% for all other applications. We understood that householders already contribute to local authorities' budgets, primarily through council tax. But it is now the case that for single dwelling house improvements and other alterations, fees will jump by 105%, from £258 to £528. And for two or more dwelling houses, the increase is also an eye-watering 105%, from £509 to £1,043. And we remain concerned that this measure simplifies that people who are simply trying to make improvements to their homes in line with local planning policies and national regulations are being burdened with ever high fees. And due to Labour's local government finance settlement, councils are already having to raise council tax by 5%, the maximum amount that they can raise without going to a referendum. These councils represent people who are already dealing with tax hikes imposed by this government and must now navigate these increased costs just to make small improvements to their properties. We are concerned because there is no evidence that these rises will deliver a better service for local people who are going through the planning system, for simple changes and low-level planning alterations. Nowhere in the impact assessment is there conclusive proof that this money will go back into restaffing planning departments or help the efficiency on deciding planning applications, which we know are far too long for far too many people, while increasing costs on people that are already suffering the brunt of the government's fiscal decisions. So I would be grateful, and the Minister hinted at his expectation on local authorities to keep these extra revenues in planning departments, but I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what monitoring mechanism he will personally be putting in place to see if these increases will deliver on better services for local people and planning decisions, and if not, what mechanisms will he put in place to amend these and bring them back down if there is not that improvement in efficiency that we would expect to see. The Local Government Association has identified a £1.7 billion shortfall directly resulting from the government's national insurance contribution hikes. And this isn't a hypothetical problem. It's a real issue impacting local services, including planning authorities. And as I say, there is no guarantee that this extra burden on people will result in quicker planning decisions. Furthermore, local authorities across the country are facing cuts that go beyond planning. As my honourable friend, the member for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner has pointed out previously, millions of pounds are being cut from crucial funding schemes like New Homes Bonus and the Rural Services Grant. These cuts, combined with the national insurance hike and this increase, are pushing councils further into financial crisis. And the case for treating householders differently from large developers is clear. Just as the last government did, home improvements, however small, are right for homeowners, in line with local and national planning policies. They are not there to be priced out of reach by ordinary homeowners. And improvements to homes under schemes as described free up the market and help create sustainable communities and help local supply chains. I urge the government to reconsider these fee increases and the impact they will have on ordinary households across the country. And I cannot see that there will be better services at the end of this proposal. As I've mentioned, Ms Jardine, we will not divide the committee, but I would hope that the Minister will take some of these comments to outline to the committee this morning how he expects that we will see those efficiencies improved. But I would say, finally, that we need a fairer, more balanced approach to funding planning authorities, one that does not target hard-working homeowners. And it is time for the government to rethink its approach to planning and local funding, to stand up for the people who matter most, and they are the citizens who contribute to their communities and the local economy. Thank you.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Gideon Amos.
Thank you, Ms Jardine. Liberal Democrats are concerned that without planning officers in place, we simply won't deliver the homes that we need. They're less likely to be genuinely affordable homes, they're less likely to be nature-positive homes, they're less likely to be the zero-carbon homes that we all want to see, Ms Jardine. As already been referred to, there's a £362 million shortfall after fee uncutting is taken into account for planning authorities. And the RTPI, Royal Town Planning Institute, pointed out that there's a lack of robust data on how many officers there are per region, per local area, which is a concern in itself. Without that data, we can't have a realistic picture of how the service can be improved. The House Builders Federation, through a Freedom of Information request, pointed out that 80% of local planning authorities are operating below capacity, which is not where we need to be if we're going to address the housing crisis. So we will want to see authorities given more flexibility to set their own fees, determined locally by those communities. We'd like to see minimum ring-fenced funding for local planning authorities. I know in a previous debate, I think the Minister referred to some guidance relating to ring-fencing. I'd be grateful if the Minister could say some more about how that funding and budgets within hard-pressed local authorities can be ring-fenced for the planning service, which is important to so many people in their local economies concerned. We welcome, of course, the 300 additional planning officers that the government announced, but a less than one, often graduate per council area, is not going to have a massive impact. We need to see more than that in our planning departments. Taken together, those measures would help us address the need for better services for our local communities and in our councils. Planning officers, Ms Jardine, and councils are not blockers. They are the problem solvers. And if we're going to have housing which is genuinely affordable, we're going to have housing which is net zero, going to deliver biodiversity net gain, we need those planning officers in place, and we need councils to be supported, especially at a time when social care crisis is putting so much pressure on local councils that funding is being diverted, quite rightly, for frontline care operations. The last government took £1 billion out of funding earmarked to reform social care, and unless local government funding is properly reformed, unless social care as a key part of that is delivered, councils will continue to struggle. They'll continue to lean on other departments for cuts and for savings, and planning departments will continue to suffer however many statutory instruments are passed in this place. So until those issues are addressed, Ms Jardine, we suggest that these proposals don't go far enough, but they are welcome, and we do welcome them, and we will be supporting as a small step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jardine. Can I thank both the Liberal Democrat spokesman and the Shadow Minister for their contributions? I know that on the part of the Shadow Minister, doesn't feel strongly enough about these reforms to formally divide the committee on them, but he makes a number of pertinent challenges and questions which I will seek to answer. Both the members who have just spoken outlined the problem we face. Local planning authorities are significantly under-resourced. They are hard-pressed. And when it comes to planning application fees, despite those increases made by the previous government in December 2023, we have a funding shortfall across the whole of England of £362 million, and it's that problem that these regulations are attempting to address. Now, fees were consolidated in 2012, Ms Jardine, by the coalition government. They've only been increased twice since in 2018 and 2023. And importantly, prior to changes in 2023, which will come into effect on the 1st of April, they were never index linked, so they've never risen with inflation. And as such, the gap between the cost of processing an application and the fees charged has widened over time. So we are proposing through these regulations to increase those fees on certain types of applications where the funding shortfall is most acute, and the types of applications that I said in my opening remarks that constitute the bulk of applications that come into local authorities. The current fee on householder applications, just to give the Shadow Minister a sense of the shortfall we're talking about, of £258, that covers less than half the cost of processing that application to the local authority. And we think it is right in principle, as I've said, that it's not taxpayers who should bear that burden, but the people that are making the application and will directly benefit from the consent once it's processed. And the planning application fee represents a small proportion, as I said, less than 1% of typical overall development costs, and through permitted development rights, certain types of applications incur no fee at all. The Shadow Minister rightly raised the issue of ring fencing. Now, the government is clear that it expects the income from planning fees should be retained and directly invested in the delivery of planning application services. Managing public money principles should ensure that planning fees are effectively ring-fenced. And while we believe they are in most instances, I have heard anecdotal accounts of planning fees being used to cross-subsidise other council services, and we are therefore considering ring fences as part of the government's longer-term plans for planning fees that will enable local planning authorities to set their own fees. When it comes to performance, in return for increasing planning fees, we do expect local authorities to invest more in their planning service to deliver better performance. We are able to monitor and will continue to monitor the performance of local planning authorities through the Planning Performance Dashboard and quarterly planning statistics that the Department receives. And the planning performance regime ensures that local planning authorities who are underperforming are held to account. The previous government took action in this respect. We stand ready to do so where necessary. Both members raised concerns about general funding for local authorities. Ms Jardine, the government are under no illusions about the scale of financial issues facing councils and the potential for continued instability as we work to fix the foundations of local government. That is why we have a framework in place to support councils in the most difficult positions, and why we work on a collaborative basis to help councils managing their financial challenges. Lastly, let me say something about local fee setting. It is important that local planning authorities are well resourced, as we've said, so that they can deal with planning applications efficiently. I will give way in just 1 second. And so that they don't hold up development that's necessary for economic growth. Happy to do that.
I thank the Minister for giving my full member's attention to my register of interest in local councillor. He's proposing to increase the fees, but from my understanding, they're not going to go to full cost recovery. Could he just set out why they're doing a leapfrog approach and not going to full cost recovery, if that is indeed where the government wants to get to?
Well, we think we're striking the right balance between increasing fees on the type of applications outlined in the regulation, but we're also very clear that nationally set planning fees can never be set in a way that covers every local authority's costs for their planning application service, because costs vary between local authorities. The honourable gentleman will be fully aware of that in his own role. And so we think the only way to do this is for local planning authorities ultimately to be able to set their own planning fees, and we intend, as I've said, to take forward measures in the proposed planning and infrastructure bill to introduce a power to enable local planning authorities to set their own fees so that they will be able to recover their costs for their planning application services. So in conclusion, Mr Jardine, we think the proposed increases in fees are necessary and timely. These changes address, as I've said, the critical funding shortfalls faced by our local planning authorities and will provide them with the resources they need to deliver improved services in the short term. I hope the committee will welcome them, which I've made clear will help ensure our planning system is faster and more efficient and better equipped to facilitate our ambitious plan for change milestone of building 1.5 million homes in this Parliament. I beg to move.
question is that the committee has considered the draft town and country planning fees for applications, deemed applications, requests and site visits, England, amendment and transitional provision, Regulation 2025. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.